The ping pong balls have settled and the Jazz are drafting 10th. Who should they take? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and I'm excited and honored to be back with you guys again for another week of Locked On Jazz. This week, I'll be at the NBA Combine. I'm flying out right after I record this. You guys know me, attendee of the NBA Combine last year, soon to be this year. Worked for the Jazz as a statistician and broadcast assistant for the last couple years. And I love college hoops, so I'll give you a insightful opinion on some of these guys the Jazz could be selecting at 10th. And I'm also joined by Richard Stayman today. Mavs Draft will be at the Combine together for an unbiased assessment of what he thinks the Jazz should do. And we'll get to him just in a second. But thank you guys first for making Locked On Jazz your first listen every day, especially on this Mother's Day. And remember, our Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. Today's question is simply, who should the Jazz draft and why? Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, so make sure to make some plays and win some money as the playoffs carry on. All righty, I'll get you to the roadmap here. Richard, we're going to talk about where the Jazz are drafting. That's 10th. Who seems likely to be there and who's drafted because of who's drafting ahead of the Jazz. In the second segment, we'll make cases for who the Jazz should take at number 10 while addressing, do we prioritize the fit or potential or ceiling versus floor? And in the final segment, we'll discuss which players are the most potential at 10, and should the Jazz explore that route? Because, you know, it's supposed to be a starless draft, and if the people that are high floor have gone in the first 9, should the Jazz take a swing? So thank you for joining me, Richard, and I'm excited to be with you all week long, doing a lot of podcasts together, but I'm just looking for your initial reaction. Why are my Jazz so unlucky?
Hey, I predicted the Hawks into the lottery. I didn't predict number 1, but I relate. For those who don't know, I'm a Mavs fan. 2019, the Mavs, Pelicans, and Grizzlies all had equal chance, had the exact same percentages, like down to like 3 or 4 decimal places, is where it started differentiating. But all of them had the same chances to get in the lottery. The Pelicans and Grizzlies jumped up, and they were the 1 and 2 pick to get Zion and John Morant. The Mavs had to surrender their pick to Atlanta. So it was, I fully relate to being just completely screwed over in the lottery, to be honest. And I get that. But the good news is I feel like after Alex Sarr, you could paint this draft any order in the top 10. 2 through 10 feels like a very similar tier for me, at least. I don't know if you're the same.
And that's kind of where I wanted to start. But just for people who care about statistics, the Jazz had an equal chance of drafting 1 as they did 10, and the Jazz got 10. So it feels worse than it is. That was a 6.7% chance of it occurring, and it occurred. The other thing I would like to say is for those of you who point out to me saying, well, the Jazz fell at 10, and you phrased it last week. Well, the difference between the top is slim, and Leaf, you said that the gap between 3 and 9 is super slim. And I would agree with all of what I just said and also what Richard just said. But I do feel like 10 is kind of a level where the floor starts to become a little less, okay, I can see him contributing to my team, and there's more shots in the dark of what you're going to get than even 8. I think I said in a previous episode that 3 through 8, there was like 5 players that I would reevaluate, and you could convince me any order. And there's going to be people that have the exact opposite order of me. So if you're at 8, like the Jazz were likeliest to be, that would have been great. So even though there's players I thought were boom or bust, or I felt like the timeline provided someone safer at 10, I think there are players that can fall to the Jazz that the Jazz could make useful right away, because there's going to be teams that prioritize safety and just pieces. Like you phrased this on the Big Board episode that we're drafting pieces this year, and I've kind of adopted that. Instead of drafting home runs in 1 through 3, you may be drafting doubles, and you're trying to hit singles the rest of the way. So let's just ask you this: who are the players that you have your eye on for the Utah Jazz at number 10?
So for those who don't know, I'm a huge Ron Holland fan. I have seen him in Dallas for years. I live in Dallas. He's from Dallas. He stayed in school in Dallas, went to the G League Ignite. I think that was a bad fit for him. Not having a point guard really hurt. I think he would be the best fit. And the reason I wanted to paint some context here, I think a lot of draft Twitter, just pulling up the consensus board, let's just look at that real fast. I think he's in the top 3. Like right now, he is, let's see, I clicked the wrong link. He is currently he's number 9, which is really shocking because I think a lot of the people I associate myself with on draft Twitter have him top 5, but clearly the bigger consensus, like the big ones such as Sam Vecini and ESPN. So that's where it starts to differ. They hold the most weight on these boards. What they're hearing is NBA teams don't value Ron Holland as much as people on Twitter and just like people who are doing video scouting, that we value him. So the gap is different. And because of that, I have Ron Holland second. I'm not moving off of that. This is very much a draft where I know what I've seen from the get-go. Nothing has changed enough really for a lot of these guys to really see changing off of it. I think you get great value if he's there right at 10.
That's all another guy I've circled, and in some notes I put together, I compiled a list of, okay, who could possibly be there, and the names you're going to see are Dalton, Knecht. You're going to see occasionally like an Isaiah Collier, a Jacoby Walter. I don't really think the Jazz go in that direction. For Knecht's case, it's because he's older, and I don't think that's the timeline the Jazz are looking to work with. I think Walter and Collier are a little bit of boom or bust. And then there's a wing group, and that includes Ron Holland, that I think includes Cody Williams, Zacharie, Risacher, and Ron Holland. And I think it may be wishful, but if you look at how many of the wings there are, and I didn't include Buzelis in that, but I could have, that I think could fall, and you look at the number of players, and I think maybe a guy like Reed Shepherd starts going higher because someone wants him to be a guard, one of those wings could fall, and Holland to me is the one who has the most potential. So we're going to get into that discussion kind of later on the episode of, if you're going to draft for potential, who's the guy there? I think we're both going to go with Holland, who I also have in my top 5. And now the question becomes, from an outside perspective, you don't know necessarily like the Jazz's timeline as like innately, but we don't either. We're guessing, but the Jazz seem to feel like they want a younger player, that Danny Ainge likes these young players, and he typically took 3 19-year-olds last year. What is the case for, and what's the case against Dalton Knecht, who's likely going to be mocked to the Jazz quite frequently in the months to come?
Yeah, the knocks aren't because of his play. It's just because, like, okay, you were bad this year. You had the 8th worst record, right? Or at least the 8th odds. I can't remember if they were in a tiebreaker, but you were in that position. You want someone who's going to ultimately be that like franchise changer, gets a really good second contract kind of thing. Or if they're not a franchise changer, ideally, no matter the strength of a draft class, you want somebody to easily get a second contract that you feel comfortable giving out. Dalton Knecht does do that. The problem is right now, who would you say that Utah Jazz have a core building block player for the next 7 years?
I would contend no, as I've told the Jazz fans on this podcast numerous times, that Lauri Markkanen's really good, but he's not good enough to be the franchise player. So I think the Jazz should have one more year of being bad, select in the top 8 next year, and get yourself a franchise-changing piece. So that's why I think you try to draft a piece, and that's why I think Jazz fans would be discouraged that they're drafting 10, because if you're drafting 10, I think it's harder to find someone with a high floor. And that's why I think that 1 through 9, especially like 3 through 9, is going to be like safety. Like they're going to be thinking like on base percentage type of guys, to continue the baseball analogy. They're going to get people that make plays and are okay, and they're not going for the boomer bust home run hitting slugger that one year hits 35 dingers and the next is a strikeout machine. And so I think that's where the frustration would stem from. But I do think because of that, there's a chance that a good player falls to the Jazz.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how I see it too. Is like, okay, you got somebody good. Dalton Knecht is going to get a second contract safely. The problem is you look at the Wizards, right, where they are. And I agree with everything you said. Like next year they should try and be back because the draft is that good. But next year, like you look at the Wizards, they're kind of, I hate saying the word wasting, but like what is Corey Kispert doing there? Like that, he is not the kind of player, like he is nice, but they drafted him with Beal as a complimentary player, not this guy to be shooting efficiently and kind of just wasting on a rebuild, because that player is the player every winning team needs. So Dalton Knecht would be somebody I think that does help ultimately if you're looking more than just the next 2 years. The problem is by the time his impact is most felt, he's already on his second contract. He's not going to be that value play. I feel like I'd rather swing a little bit higher. And again, it's not anything on him. It's just kind of that timeline and that fit.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's a good analogy between Kispert. I don't think he fits well with the Jazz right now because he would help us too much in this short run and not enough in the long run. Like we talked about, we talked about how Holland's outside the top 10 in some NBA circles. We talked about how we value him. Coming up next, we'll make cases for who the Jazz should take at pick number 10. And we'll discuss, will the Jazz prioritize fit or potential, ceiling versus floor? But first, a word from Prize Picks. In case you don't know, let me tell you what Prize Picks is. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. Well, you can pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn 10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, and college basketball or baseball entries on Prize Picks. America's #1 sports fantasy app. Prize Picks also has something for every sports fan, from basketball and hockey to League of Legends and everything in between. You can pick on Anthony Edwards, Caitlin Clark, Connor McDavid, and Jude Bellingham, all in the very same entry. I've played Prize Picks before, but since I work for the NBA, I can't bet on the NBA. So I've done it for baseball. I've even dabbled with tennis, where I try to bet, make plays on aces. Like I'll say, will they get more aces or less aces against this player in the Grand Slam? And Roland Garros is coming around the corner. So if there are any weird tennis fans like myself, go check that out. If you're a baseball person, I like to look at strikeouts and see if the star pitchers will get more strikeouts than advertised. It's really, really fun. I recommend it highly. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for the first deposit match up to $100. That's LOCKEDONNBA, and you'll get a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Also, let me tell you about Murdoch Chevy. Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years. Chevy is as American as it gets. You know that by now. If you think of a movie and you think of a truck rolling on in, you just know it's a Chevy. Located in Woods Cross and Logan, the great lineup of Chevy trucks, the Colorado and the Silverado, are all on display, and you know what's in inventory if you look at the great websites maintained by Murdoch Chevy. And you can go to the website and see the latest deals as well as what's in stock. The amazing lineup of SUVs is nothing to scoff at either. In fact, it's fabulous. With the Tahoe, the Suburban, and the Blazer, the Equinox, and the Trax, make sure to make your run into Murdoch Chevy and get yourself a car or a truck. All right, welcome back in. And are you guys, just one last question, are you guys still watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and asking yourself, why is it so loud? Why are we dealing with all this shouting? Well, then make the switch to Locked on Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked on Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, we're back. Richard Stayman, a.k.a. Mavs Draft. Make sure to follow him if you don't. Great draft content. I'll be with him all week at the Combine. We're both flying out right after this, and so we're excited to give you more and more content. So the Jazz are drafting 10th. No one's thrilled about that, which to me means the Jazz will be drafting a wing of some variety, because I don't think the guards will appeal to the Jazz that'll be available, because I think a Reed Shepherd, a Rob Dillingham, those type of players will be up ahead. And I mentioned that an Isaiah Collier, a Jacoby Walter don't really appeal to me, and maybe they do for the Jazz. It seems a little less likely, but I think Jazz fans will be happy about that. So, Richard, we're putting on our prognosticating hats right now. Who do you think, one, is going to be there, and two, who would you pick for the Utah Jazz? And I think I'll probably agree, but if I don't, I'll make sure to make my pick as well.
Yeah, before I answer that, let me just give some background of some of the recent 10th picks. Starting from last year, I'm going to go all the way to 2010 here, or really 2009, because I think that's where that pick really kind of gained a different turn. So last year, Cason Wallace, Johnny Davis, Cody Williams, Jalen Smith. We're at 2020, now 2019. Cam Reddish. So that's 4 busts in a row.
I think Cason's pretty good.
Cason's good. He'll stick. Then you got a good player in Mikal Bridges. Zach Collins seems like kind of a median outcome. Thon Maker was a bust. Justice Winslow, kind of average bust. Alfred Payton, average bust. TJ McCollum hit. Austin Rivers is probably the most average player in this range. Jimmer Fredette was a bust. Paul George, Brandon Jennings, boom. And then Brook Lopez, boom. I'm not going to go any further, but as you can tell, this is a very boomer bust range. So I think it's actually going to be the same answer, though. I hate to keep giving cop outs. I think it's going to be Ron Holland. I feel like not only is he the ideal fit for what Utah needs on the wings, as that potential to be a do-it-all two-way wing. I feel like he's going to be there. I think that's the match made in heaven for him.
I like the Holland pick, and I have him as a likely one, but for the sake of difference, I'll give another pitch right here. I think that Holland, because of the intel that we hear, which may or may not be accurate, seems to be the most likely to be here. But I'll give players that I think fit, and based on the flurry of the draft and who goes where, could fall. So I think there's 2 options along with Holland that are in that same trio quartet of wings that I've mentioned, and that would be who I deem to be really good fits, and I talked about this in a previous episode for you every day, is about the fits for the Utah Jazz that fit on the wing. And that would be Zacharie, Risacher, or Cody Williams. If they were to fall to 10, it's not likely, but I wouldn't say it's impossible at all, because I prefer them over a guy like Dalton Knecht. You say, well, if their appeal is something like this and they could produce early, then you go for Knecht. But I think it's because they're younger. For instance, Risacher reminds me of like a Cam Johnson. Here is what I wrote about him and said in a previous episode. I see him as a certainly high floor over high ceiling player. Risacher has a slight chance of hitting by being that exceptional of a shooter, but the formula is there to be a good player rather than an all-star. Like, for instance, the best player of that archetype, Michael Porter Jr., is nowhere near being an all-star, but he's a really excellent player. I don't think he's a guy that I would ever take at number 1, so that's why I was initially sour on him. But if the guy's available at 7, that's where people start to make those picks. But if he goes, then other players are going to fall. I also think that Risacher figures to be good because he's got good intangibles. And if Cam Johnson is kind of your medium of that archetype, and that's what I think he can be, that's $24 million. So you talked about second contracts. That's a really good one. I think he jives well with the Jazz's timeline. He's young, and he could develop alongside other players that aren't sensational but are solid. Cody Williams is much of the same, but I think he's better ball handler than Risacher or even Holland. And I see him as more of like a 6'8" combo guard that Cody is. I don't think he's what Jalen is as an athlete, but what he is he's still a pro athlete and a plus athlete as a pro because of his size. And he just needs to fill out his body, be stronger. And yes, his shot may not be fantastic, even though he shot well, because he's a hesitant shooter. But at least the touch is there. The size is there. He played as an isolation guy at Colorado with a team with 2 pros and first team all conference players. And so I think there's just this ability to be a plus in multiple aspects of the game that Cody Williams possesses. So if he or Risacher fall, I think they're both fit picks and maybe they fit the high floor, but I think there's a bit of a ceiling enough to make that pick. And then Holland, I think, is the boomer bust, like you mentioned. Like, if Holland doesn't pan out great, I think he's more of a Josh Okogie. But if he pans out well, I think you're getting RJ Barrett. RJ Barrett was a third pick that people thought was going to be an all-star. And if he's there at 10, you have to swing. And I think people are going to go for these singles so much that the Jazz might as well swing for a home run, as I mentioned.
And that's exactly the 10th pick, right? That's how history has played out. I personally think Cody Williams is the biggest boomer bust. I think his floor is easily out of the league, like you said, Holland. I think there's a higher floor for him. I have a lot of concerns, just statistically speaking here. My favorite, for those who don't know, Bart Torvik, it's an advanced college stats site. You can filter things out and find trends. It's really useful. If you run this, it's basically the Cody Williams filter. Underclassmen, first-round picks that are 6'7" or taller, so true wings, with a BPM, box plus minus, under 5. 5 is like the bar of where you want somebody, I would say, in the top 10. That was kind of in his role to be. Cody had a 2.9 BPM, so that's pretty low. The players in this mix, Patrick Williams, Kevin Knox, Cam Reddish, Zaire Williams, multiple 10th picks, by the way, as you can tell. Jed Howard last year, Mo Harkless, Troy Brown, Jarrell Martin. There are some hits in there. There's Jalen Brown, Jaden McDaniels, and Patrick Williams. But ultimately, that's 2.5 of like 10 players. That's an extremely low chance. I'm very out on Cody Williams. I think even on the eye test, I would really hate for that to be the pick. I think that's writing on the wall right there.
See, I actually like Cody Williams because I think there's a lot of upside, but I also think what he does at a decent level right away translates. The question would be is how confident can he be in his shot? How much stronger can he get? And I think the eye test is a really hit or miss one with Cody Williams because he battled an ankle injury, a facial fracture, knee injury. He was injury riddled. And in the games where there was the highest leverage, he often played hurt. So I think it sapped some of what he could do. And obviously, everyone has different things pop up in their season. But I think that's a hard thing to evaluate. And if he's healthy, maybe some of those concerns dissipate a little bit. But I think it's a valuable insight that, yes, he's got the measurables. Yes, he's got the pedigree. He's got the name. His brother's succeeding, but those numbers didn't prove it at this point. So let's finish this segment with this question. If you're drafting at 10 in any draft, and then answer it for this one as well, do you draft for fit or best player available? And secondly, do you pick for potential or floor at 10? Because I think in most drafts, this is where it starts to get dicey, as you just proved with the number 10. But in this draft, I think the theory at the top is going to be different. So I wonder if it changes the calculus at 10.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the fit everywhere, right? Like, Last year, Oklahoma City had just missed the play, and they were clearly trending up. They were the number 1 seed this year. They went for fit. Honestly, they went for kind of blend, best player available, but they went floor, really, is what it is. And I would call that closer to fit. I would say with Utah's position, go for best player available. I said it before on the last time I was on here, and I remember reading the comments. It was not well received, but look, there's nobody. You have to just swing, even if it's a redundant position. Like, you just kind of have to do it. It's if you think there's somebody that has a better ceiling than Taylor Hendricks, for example, in this class at 10, unlikely. But if for whatever reason you buy into that, like say Tijon Salon, right? If you buy into him being that guy, you got to do it. He's also one of the biggest boomer bust players. So I would say ultimately best player available.
I always am best player available. I've said this for years, and honestly, I've had pretty good success in the boards I've published in terms of picking the player with higher potential has typically worked for me. This year, I wonder if the calculus has to change, but I'm right there with you on that. The one thing I would say is if the Jazz had drafted 4 or 8, and there was the mix of those wings, I might have gone for the safest of those wings because none of them I deem to be the franchise cornerstone. And if that's the case, and you're trying to have someone who will be a piece to help you solidify around whoever you hopefully get as a star from the next draft or via trade. But at 10, I think it's worth taking a shot. I think it's worth taking a swing, like you said. And we're gonna continue discussing that because I think it's an interesting discussion to have. But coming up next, I'll tell you exactly who has the most potential. And Richard just teased one of them, Tijon Salon, that could be available at 10. But first, let me tell you about FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 winning bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, welcome back into Locked On Jazz, where the Jazz are drafting 10th, as we just discussed, and in the 2024 NBA draft. It's not what we wanted. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not what we wanted, but if there's ever a draft where opinions vary so heavily on who's going to be good, where top guys get drafted, and just like the relative unknown of this draft, it's this one. So maybe the Jazz can get a steal. We talked in a few prior episodes, the Jazz in 2013, there was a lot of picks that were made later that were far better because at the top there wasn't a star, so people maybe went for safety, and you get a lot of Tristan Thompsons. You got some Enes Kanter type players. That wasn't that same draft, but you have those. That was 2011. In 2013, you had Anthony Bennett, Victor Oladipo, Cody Zeller. Those type of players go in the top 5, and then you're going to see a lot of players from 10 to 20 have good careers, 20 to 30 have good careers. If that's the same as this one, the Jazz have a chance. So we talked about potential. And I want to make this point. Like, maybe you guys disagree with my saying in a previous episode that the floor guys were kind of the Dalton Knecht, the Shepherds at 8. Well, I think that's still kind of the talk. And obviously, I think Shepard's gone before this. That's why I'm not talking about him. It's just I'm personally lower. But I'm not trying to disparage their upside. I just think that if you're talking about actually shooting for upside in a top 10, you typically are shooting for someone that you think can be an all-star. And Richard listed out a list of 10, and there was 2.5 guys that were really good, and 2 of them were all-stars, and the other one was a solid player. So who is that in this year's draft? Let's ask. We know we're going to talk about Ron Holland. We have already. So let's start with Tijon Salon. What is there to like about him, and why is he kind of the mystery? To me, he reminds me of Bilal Coulibaly of last draft. And I'm personally higher on him than I think a lot are. I have him at 12 on my board.
Yeah, I think with him, what part of it is like it's a bad draft class. There's a young kid who has all the tools but hasn't realized it. That may sound familiar because that's what happened in 2013. People are trying to replicate, and he has the same range as Giannis. People are trying to find that next Giannis, trying to find that one star, because almost every single draft class is going to produce an all-star. No matter how much we rag on this class, probably an all-star is going to form from it. So people are trying to take that gamble. It kind of makes, it's an easy one to call your shot and say hey, I'm pretty smart. I saw Tijon Salon becoming really good. But what's with him is beyond that, combination of mystery in that regard, where he's not very good at the moment, but there are flashes. He's super athletic. One of the most fluid athletes in the draft. I think he can generally it goes with the fluidity. His reaction time on defense is good, but he still has no idea how to play defense. His on-ball defense is rough. He's still learning the game. Jump shot has improved a ton this last year, but it's still very far away. But you asked me to name some positives. It's really the athleticism. He has like some ball skills, and it's hope that the athleticism turns into a functional player. And it seems to be like he took his step as a shooter, and now people are hoping, he can be that two-way complete player like 6'8", 6'9".
Yeah, I'll read off some stuff I've written and some that are just popularized. He's a nuisance off the ball. I think off the ball he's a better defender than he is on the ball at this point. He's not refined, but he's got such traits that way. Shooting the three, he was up at 39% at one point this season, fell down to 33. But he's playing on a winning team. They just made the playoffs, so he's not going to be at the NBA Combine, and that's interesting to me because if you're playing big minutes and you're starting to have good performances, that sounds exactly like Bilal Coulibaly. And so far, I would say Coulibaly's been solid, but I don't know if I would have taken him at 7 based off the early returns. But that's not why they took him at 7. They took him for the potential. Like you said, you nailed it. You talked about Giannis being the archetype here. In the 2013 draft, you started taking mystery shots, and he had just these undeniable traits, and obviously he's become a great player. So that's the one. That's what you'd say for Solon. I think he's got a higher all-star potential than most players in this draft, bar none. I even mentioned him in an episode where I ranked out the top 3, and then I said, here's the wild card that if I were to be drafting in the 10 to 15 range, I would consider taking Tidjane Solon. So I would take a consideration of taking him at 10 for the Jazz. Obviously, Richard and I are both at top 5 for Holland, and so Holland, if he's there at 10, would be our pick. So is there anyone else? And I know, for Holland, let me just, for those of you who don't know, we haven't gone into it too much. He's someone where my philosophy of potential has him higher than someone where floor is safe. So I'm kind of in the minority, I think, in a lot of those, especially in this draft class. But his potential makes me more curious, and that's why I'm high. He's 6'6", so his wing size is a little less desirable, but I think he's got a relentless motor. He attacks the rim well. He's a decisive and explosive finisher at the basket. He can attack closeouts. He's great in transition defensively. He's physical. He'll beat you up on the point of attack defensively, and he knows how to play basketball. He scored 20 points a game in the G League. So that's the guy that we would take. Is there anyone else, Richard, that you said, okay, he's here at 10, the Jazz should take him because he will be a hit to some degree? Like, out of that list you named, he would finish, in your estimations, top 5 out of those 10 players you listed. There was only 3 that we thought were mostly hits. There's 4 that I would say were successful for where they were picked, but there was 3 that were hits. Is there someone that you think the Jazz would be silly not to take if he's there and it's not Ron Holland?
Here's my thing. There's about 8 players in the mix for the top 5. Somebody's going to fall, and all it takes from there is from 2 teams to go, actually, we like somebody else not from this mix, which is pretty normal in a bad draft class. As I explained earlier, Thonmaker, like, for example, in 2016, nobody saw that coming. So I think that something like that could easily happen, which pushes one player down. Like, it just comes even more likely. I don't think this is going to happen, but it would be really interesting to see if Rob Dillingham falls, because, and if he is there, I think you have to take him, because
I would be thrilled,
because like the NBA is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. This year, I think was the tallest like average size across the league at 6'4". Rob Dillingham 6'1". There's a real chance he does fall. The 10 is a bit extreme. The Jazz could probably move up with some picks, but I would say he's like that. Like, what if? Not that likely, but what if?
Whew. I have Holland as my number 2 player, and the more I think I might have him my number 1 player. So if he's there and the Jazz don't take him, I will be losing my mind. And you guys will hear all about it. I love Ron Holland. I personally think if he passes San Antonio at 4, they're out of their mind. Pairing him with Wembanyama would be potent. The player that I would say, I think I'd have a really hard time passing on Cody Williams at 10. Should he be there? Richard and I disagree there. And then there would be some like lower. I think if the board goes as my board goes, and basically Sarr's gone, Klingen's gone, Topic is gone, Buzelis is gone, Castle's gone, Dillingham's gone, Holland's gone, and Risacher's gone. That's 9 right there. That means Reed Shepard's there. So what I think happens is Shepard surpasses one of them, and obviously you might want to take the other player. But I think the next guy that I have 10 on my board right now is Dalton Knecht, and I know I've said, yeah, he doesn't really fit the timeline the Jazz have, But at that point, you're following the best player available. So while we've said, okay, Knecht is similar to Kispert, where he'd be in a barren land where he may be productive, and he proves like he's a really good player. What are the positives about Dalton Knecht for the Utah Jazz? Because I think that's one that'll be really mocked, and it may not be the sexiest pick as a 23-year-old that was little heralded but had a really good year. But give me some positives for Knecht, because at 10, if the board goes how I have mine, I would be content. Wouldn't be thrilled, but that's kind of how I felt about Hendricks last year. I had him in the same range, and most of my guys were gone. I liked Cam Whitmore a lot, but I think the Jazz played the board the way it was without trading up, and they played, okay, here's the 9th best player in the class.
Yeah, Dalton Knecht is extremely scalable. He is the SEC Player of the Year. He is not just a shooter. Like, his primary strength is shooting, but Tennessee made him a first option with a combination of being on the ball and off the ball. But for him, you can run him off screens. He makes the right decisions. He sees the floor well. I think that's a really important, impressive part of his game. But on top of that, he's also like a true 3-level scorer with good athleticism. Like, you wouldn't really expect it, I guess, because not just because like he's a white dude and that like there's always the label, but like he doesn't explode off like the first step, but he explodes at the rim. And I think that tricks a lot of people is how he does that, where he doesn't blow by you, but also once he gets that lift, like it's hard to stop him. So I really like his game. 3-level score. He's super smart. He also has a post game that if he wants to get like, I don't think he's really gonna be posting up much, but if he gets, I don't know, Jacob Gilliard on him or something, he's going to take him to school and can hit turnaround jumpers, things like that. I think that's really important coming off of curls. Like, I think you can integrate that elsewhere. It's not a direct one-to-one, but the traits you can get from that coming off a screen into like just a slight post action into a one move, like all in one, I think that stuff matters. So there's a lot of offensive upside for him, both on and off the ball.
Yeah, I think he's someone who could be a 14-point per game scorer in a couple years in the NBA. Someone who catches off of curls, who attacks closeouts, is a sniper running off pin downs, and has good ability to read defenses. So that would by no means be a bad pick. I tend to look for upside this year. I think you have to take best available, but fitting the timeline is important. That would be my main concern. All righty. Well, Richard and I will be at the combine next time we speak. So I'm looking forward to talking with you guys on Locked On Jazz next with analysis of what players did in their drills, who shot the lights out, who measured well. Are there players that surprised me from day one at the combine? Well, I'll keep you covered all week long on Locked On Jazz. But first, I wanted to remind you guys, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national sports shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Well, thank you guys for listening. I'm bummed the Jazz are drafting 10, but we'll make sure to keep you covered on who the Jazz should draft 10th as we're at the combine. And I'll tell you the latest what transpires there all week long. So thank you for listening, and listen again all week long, and we'll keep you covered.